Welcome to Doppelnamers, where we connect the dots between people who share the same name. My name is Elizabeth Russell, and this is the story of my doppelnamer, a pioneer named Elizabeth Russell, who was tried for murder in Eau Claire, Wisconsin in 1892. At the time, it was the most famous murder trial in Wisconsin's history. With me are my good friends Mary Jean Stead and Kathy Boyle Almeida. In our last episode, we went through the elements of the crime with which Elizabeth had been charged, and we deliberated as though we were the jury. How would you say we came out?
We had a few questions, I remember.
I think we were kind of all in agreement.
With a not guilty verdict.
Yeah, that's what I remember, that we just didn't
That's
feel
what
like
I
there was
remember.
enough evidence.
We went back and forth on the question of was she killed or was she not killed?
Yes.
And was Bertha a human?
Oh, right.
So yeah, we basically came out on the side of not guilty.
Yep.
Yes.
In a moment, we'll hear the verdict from Elizabeth's actual jury. But first, as always, we share somebody else's doppelnamer story. And since it's our last episode, I'm going to introduce you to not one, but three women. The first is the sister of Patrick Henry, the Virginia orator and slave owner, who is best known for saying allegedly,
Give me liberty or give me death.
Yep. So Patrick Henry was all about freeing the colonies from British rule, but didn't really see the irony in the fact that he himself owned 67 human beings. Anyway, Patrick Henry had a sister. She was born in 1749, and she, unlike her brother, did choose to free her slaves because she believed in freedom for all people. That's person number one. The second is a woman born in 1836 in Cath, Ohio. Although not of means, this woman earned an education not really typical for a woman of her day, and she became a teacher. At age 36, though, she had a nervous breakdown and was told she should never work again. Now, women were always being told they shouldn't work anyway, whatever. So she went to live with her sister and she got super depressed, figuring, well, that was about that in terms of her life. But she recovered and she became a leader in the Women's Foreign Missionary Society of the Methodist Episcopal Church. In 1879, now in her 40s, she sailed to Japan with another female teacher, and their task was to establish a school for girls from the ground up. Her story is honestly, it's probably a podcast of its own. But the important part is this woman overcame enormous odds and opposition and founded what still exists today as Kwasi Women's University in Nagasaki, Japan. The third woman was born in 1924. She was clinically shy and had no acting experience, but because of her looks, she was persuaded to appear in movies in the 1940s. She appeared in films with John Wayne and Alan Ladd and Ray Milland, and she received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So she became a movie star. But she had debilitating stage fright in an era when mental health was not discussed. So she unfortunately drank to take an edge off the anxiety. That spiraled into addiction. And in 1961, at the age of 36, she died of an alcohol-induced heart attack. Commentators observe that her death, quote, underlined the harsh realities of life in the limelight and the often unseen battles of its brightest stars. So, sad story. Okay, so three women from three different centuries, and all three were named Elizabeth Russell.
Wow.
Wow,
Grand
interesting.
finale. That's pretty cool, though.
Well, our Elizabeth Russell endured an excruciating 5-week trial, and finally her fate would be determined by, well, by whom exactly? A jury of her peers?
It's supposed to be the jury of your peers,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, the jury consisted of 12 white men, all from the surrounding community, where, as we have heard, the prevailing view was to condemn anyone who did not conform to mainstream societal expectations. And as for a jury of her peers, let's just pause for a second. The US Constitution does not use the phrase a jury of one's peers,
Mm,
nor does the Wisconsin Constitution. We hear that term all the time, but
yeah.
it's not really a thing.
Oh,
The right to a jury trial comes from the Sixth Amendment to the US Constitution. And in part, the Sixth Amendment says, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed. It says impartial, but it does not say anything about being of one's peers.
Where did that come from?
Good question.
I got bored with the other wording.
The other thing to remember is that when it was enacted, the Sixth Amendment only applied to criminal prosecutions by the federal government, not by the states. Elizabeth was being prosecuted by the state. And I will tell you that today, the Sixth Amendment does apply to the states. But do you think it applied to Elizabeth in 1892?
probably not.
No.
It wasn't until 1968 that the US Supreme Court held that the Sixth Amendment right to a jury trial applies to the states.
Wow.
So did Elizabeth even have the right to a jury trial at all? As it turns out, yes, she did, because the Wisconsin Constitution had a provision that was almost identical to the Sixth Amendment, and it had been there since the very beginning of Wisconsin in 1848. So yes, Elizabeth had the right to an impartial jury of the county or district where the offense was committed,
But not of her peers.
but not of her peers. And here's what happened with Elizabeth's impartial jury.
Uh-oh.
When the jury went out, Elizabeth's lawyer, Mr. James, handed the foreman 2 pieces of paper. And honestly, I would guess it was actually the judge that did this, but the newspaper says it was Mr. James. Anyway, of the 2 pieces of paper, one was green and the other was white. Green was to be used for a verdict of acquittal. White was to be used for a verdict of guilty. Here is the newspaper's account of the jury returning to the courtroom after almost 24 hours of deliberations.
Oh, wow.
The foreman drew the juror's verdict from his pocket, and it was white.
Wow. Interesting.
Mrs. Russell's head sank to her breast. The judge read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Elizabeth Russell, guilty of murder in the first degree.
No way.
That's shocking.
Mr. James asked for the jury to be polled so that each man would have to affirm out loud that the verdict reflected his vote.
Wow.
Here's what the newspaper says. The judge looked sharply over his eyeglasses and asked, "Is this your verdict? Do you find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree?" And each one firmly answered, "Yes."
Wow.
Mrs. Russell wept, but said nothing. She was removed to a cell in the jail.
Wow. And that was it? Then what happens?
Well, the newspaper's account concludes with this. The verdict does not meet with any disapproval from the general public, and a considerable number warmly approve it.
Wow. They were all threatened. Weren't they all going to be lynched? That's why they warmly accepted it.
So what do you think happened next?
I mean, were there appeals back then? Did she
Well,
even-
according to the newspaper, District Attorney Frawley and lawyer Irwin, remember the tall Minnesota lawyer who had actually conducted most of the trial for the prosecution, they took the jury out to dinner.
Oh,
God.
wow.
The headline reads, "The jury dines at the Eau Claire House, the guests of Mr. Frawley and Irwin, an elegant repast, an intelligent lot of men glad to get back to their usual comforts."
Oh, boy.
Oh.
Yeah, it was such a task, such a hard thing for them.
The following is the bill of fare. So their entire menu, when they're going out to dinner with the prosecutors, was actually printed in the newspaper.
Wow.
So you want to know what they had? Here's
Yeah.
here's what they enjoyed. Vegetable soup,
Nice.
baked white Parisian potatoes, bacon and cabbage, prime beef, veal with dressing, leg of mutton with currant jelly, fricassee of chicken with dumplings, baked pork and beans, charlotte of peaches, chow chow pickles,
Diverse menu, but yeah, it seems kind of fancy.
Sounds gaseous.
pickled beets, shrimp salad, young onions, mashed potatoes, green peas, succotash, rice pudding with lemon sauce, currant pie, lemon ice cream, strawberry shortcake with cream, tea, cheese, coffee, and mixed nuts.
It's a lot of food.
Yeah.
That's a lot to print in the paper.
And that wasn't all they printed in the paper. It went on.
Wow.
It went on.
Whoa.
Wow.
Misters Frawley and Irwin made all the guests feel perfectly at home, and many funny incidents connected with the trial were reviewed.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-oh.
Like the exhuming, that was funny.
As might be expected, the guests were unanimous that Mr. Irwin should make a speech then and there. There was considerable fun over the subject that Mr. Irwin should speak on. One gentleman suggested tin horn detective, another women's rights. Ha! Hilarious.
Oh boy. Wow.
After dinner, the jury adjourned to Bonnell's Gallery, where a large picture is now being made in first-class style. Each juryman is to have a copy of the picture. They were just so pleased with themselves
Wow.
for making sure that an uppity independent woman would get her due and spend the rest of her life rotting in prison.
Is
They
that
just,
what happened?
well, good question, because there was a twist.
Okay.
Judge Bailey wasn't having it.
All right, Judge Bailey.
Yeah.
There was a
What is it?
procedure at the time where a judge, MJ, you just asked about appeals. Well,
Yeah.
the judge could send questions directly to the Wisconsin Supreme Court when the judge thought the questions to be so important or so doubtful as to require Supreme Court review. And Judge Bailey did exactly that.
All right, Judge Bailey, I like him.
He asked the Wisconsin Supreme Court to review his own ruling that permitted lawyer Irwin to assist Frawley in the prosecution. Because Irwin was not a resident of Wisconsin and he was not a member of the Wisconsin bar.
Oh.
But remember, Judge Bailey had said in the very beginning of the trial, oh, okay, yeah, you can do it.
Was he a fairly new judge?
Yes.
And so wasn't the prosecutor also pretty new?
Probably.
Oh, Frawley had barely been out of law school. And you're right, Judge Bailey hadn't been on the bench for more than a couple of
Well,
months,
that's good.
I believe.
He went back and reviewed his questioning
Totally.
decision.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the only question that he sent up.
Okay, good.
The other question, Judge Bailey also asked the Supreme Court to rule on whether Frawley's orchestration of the jail incident was misconduct that so prejudiced Elizabeth that the court should not proceed to sentence and judgment upon the verdict.
Now, was that the one where he calls her while she was in jail pretending to be?
Yes, exactly.
What did he
Where
do?
Frawley sent the guy in pretending to be working for Elizabeth's lawyer and put her
Yes.
on the phone,
Yeah.
and really Frawley
Yes.
was at the end of the
Right.
phone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
As to the first question, the Supreme Court said that allowing Irwin to appear was error.
All right.
The court wrote, "We hold that the person appointed to assist the district attorney in the prosecution of a crime punishable in the state prison must be a member of the bar of this state, and that W.W. Irwin was not eligible to such a position in this case. The
Mhm.
defendant had a right to be prosecuted by the lawfully elected or appointed officers of the law, and that right was violated.
Okay.
She ought not to have been compelled to submit to such a trial. She has suffered all the terrible consequences of an illegal trial and conviction for murder in the first degree. The error is material." As for Frawley and the jail incident, the Supreme Court said, "The prosecuting officer represents the public interest, which can never be promoted by the conviction of the innocent. His object, like that of the court, should be simply justice. When the district attorney or his assistant, by artifice and fraud and falsely pretending to be her counsel, obtained a knowledge of the facts of her case, the reasons for his disqualification to act as the prosecuting officer are strong wrong.
Mm.
His own sense of justice toward the accused ought to have induced him to retire from the case. His zeal must have become the very spirit of persecution, and his prejudice in the case inordinate and intense to have driven him to such perfidious misconduct as a high officer of the law.
Wow.
It was an error fatal to the conviction. It
Ooh.
was such error that the court should not proceed to sentence and judgment upon the verdict.
All right, yay.
Ah, perfidious.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a great word.
So some of those things came back to give those guys a lot of trouble.
Did they come back quickly with that, or did this take a long time?
Well, it took a while, and that figures into what happened next.
Ooh, all right.
Elizabeth was in prison the whole time while she's waiting.
Yes. So upon those findings, the Wisconsin Supreme Court didn't just say, it's over, you're done. They granted Elizabeth a new trial.
Oh, that's a good way to go.
Wow.
A clean slate, but yes, Elizabeth would have to go through all of this all over again.
Oh, wow. How many times can you be tried for the same offense?
You're asking all the right questions, MJ. So, of course, Frawley didn't get to prosecute the second trial because the Supreme Court already said you're a crook.
Yeah.
A lawyer named James O'Neill was appointed to prosecute the case the second time. Mr. O'Neill was another Yankee transplant from New York and an 1873 graduate of Albany Law School.
Oh, we like him already.
Elizabeth also switched lawyers. Representing her in the second trial was a Wisconsin legend named Joseph V. Quarles Jr. Quarles.
A lawyer who likes to quarrel.
Yes.
And as his first act, Mr. Quarles fought to keep Elizabeth in jail rather than let her out on bail. And we think, what? Why would he do that? The answer is because J.V. Quarles Jr. was one heck of an excellent lawyer.
Did he feel she was unsafe outside?
Well, what you were saying before, MJ, is more why he kept her in jail.
Okay.
Mr. Quarles argued that while the Supreme Court had been reviewing those questions, only the Supreme Court had jurisdiction over the case. And the trial court, meaning Judge Bailey, couldn't make any orders, including, for example, admitting the defendant to bail. That's why Quarles kept Elizabeth in jail, to emphasize this point.
Okay.
This is not how it works today. But
Yeah.
his point then was, while the Supreme Court was ruling on those questions, only the Supreme Court had jurisdiction over the case, meaning that there was no more jurisdiction in Judge Bailey's court during that period of time.
Okay.
And so that being the case, Judge Bailey didn't have authority to make any orders. Well, as it turns out, Judge Bailey had made an order before jurisdiction was officially transferred from the Supreme Court back to the trial court. And as soon as that happened, Mr. Quarles swooped in and made a very complicated argument that because Judge Bailey had made an order without having jurisdiction, Elizabeth had been placed twice in jeopardy and should for that reason go free.
Double
Oh.
jeopardy.
Exactly.
Wow.
Wow.
Interesting.
Okay. All right.
Judge Bailey considered Mr. Quarles' arguments and those of Mr. O'Neill for the prosecution. And in the end, it was J.V. Quarles Jr. for the win.
Yay.
The double jeopardy argument totally worked.
Wow.
And for that reason, Elizabeth Russell was discharged and set free once and for all.
Wow. Wow.
So she never had to go through the second trial.
Correct.
Oh, that's good news. Well,
Wow.
hopefully when she was free, she was not criticized too harshly in her community. Was she welcomed back with open arms? Probably not.
What do you think?
Probably not.
Seems like some of the neighbors would have been displeased.
Yeah,
The guys that went out to dinner would be displeased.
they certainly would. And the press.
Well, before we wrap this whole thing up, we'll do a little postscript about what actually did happen to some of our characters.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
For doing the right thing, Judge Bailey lost his next election by a landslide to Mr. O'Neill, who sat on the bench for the next 24 years.
Oh, wow. Well, he did do the right thing.
Yes.
William Frawley
Oh, he's gonna probably be elected again.
was elected mayor of Eau Claire 5 times.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
J.V. Quarles Jr. was elected to the United States Senate in 1898.
All right, we like that for him.
He was later appointed by President Theodore Roosevelt to the position of United States Judge for the Eastern District of Wisconsin, and he served in that capacity until his death in 1911.
Good long career.
Russell J. Whipple.
Oh, now let's see. Remind us about
I
him.
don't know if I remember Whipple.
That was Frawley's goon who tricked Elizabeth during the jail incident.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
He's the guy who actually went into the jail.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
okay, the poser.
So Russ Whipple became a deputy sheriff and shot an alleged suspect in the back.
Oh, boy.
Remember, we were drawing all those parallels between then and now. So here we have the police brutality.
Yeah.
And when he was tried for murder for doing this,
Well, that's good. At least he was tried for murder.
his defense lawyer was
Holy.
William Frawley,
Of course.
and he was exonerated.
So when the whole question came up about the jail incident, Whipple's name never came up as, oh, maybe we should prosecute him somehow.
No, because the only question was whether Elizabeth's trial had been tainted, yes or no.
Okay.
Well, my question was, what were the attorney rule of professional ethics at the time? Because if that was today, Frawley would immediately have lost his license.
Oh, yeah.
He was pretty severely dressed down by the Supreme Court, but I don't see that there were any consequences. Peter Erickson
Oh, yeah.
remarried
Okay.
and stayed in Eau Claire until his death in 1954 at age 86.
A long life.
Did his second wife live for any length of time?
Died under questionable circumstances. Victor W. James, who was Elizabeth's attorney in the first trial,
Okay.
sued William Carson, the lumber baron who had
Yeah.
employed Elizabeth's husband Thomas, to get paid because apparently Mr. Carson had agreed to pay for Elizabeth's defense.
Oh, okay.
That litigation dragged on for years and almost certainly cost way more than Mr. James was owed in the first place.
Wow.
Speaking of William Carson, he died in 1898. Right after his death, a woman named Henrietta Proctor showed up, claiming that she was Carson's illegitimate daughter.
Hmm.
And the facts kind of line up to suggest that she was. But of course, she was a woman, and
Yeah.
Carson was an icon. So when her claim went to court,
Thrown out.
yeah, she lost. In 1914, Carson's heirs, minus Henrietta Proctor, donated 134 acres to the city of Eau Claire, and today Carson Park is a centerpiece of the city.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Have you been there, T.S.?
Yes, I visited Carson Park when I went to Eau Claire to do the research in the archives there.
Very cool.
Thomas and Elizabeth Russell moved north to Bruce, Wisconsin. They
Probably a good idea.
just got out of there.
Start fresh.
Very smart.
How far north do you have to go to have a fresh start back then? You have
Well-
to go pretty far, a couple hours.
They went a couple hours.
Good.
They lived quietly until Elizabeth's death, which unfortunately was just a few years later. She died at age 60.
Natural causes.
One of her
She
spells.
didn't shoot off a gun in the backyard.
He did not shoot off a gun in the backyard.
Drink out of that spoon.
Thomas Russell lived to be 85 years old.
Oh,
Did he still go back out on his trips to the forests?
Well, after he retired, he moved out to the West Coast and actually lived with one of Elizabeth's nephews.
Oh, okay.
And when he died, Thomas left everything to some random relative of his and zero to the nephew that had taken care of him for so long.
Oh, boy.
that's strange.
That's rough. Oh, well, I'm
Aw.
glad justice prevailed, in
Me
my
too.
opinion.
I know.
It was a long process for Elizabeth and her family.
I wonder what happened to her dad.
Still up there.
When you first were saying it, I didn't get the connection. I'm like, why would he want her to stay in jail? And he was not a novice lawyer. He
No,
was-
he was
Okay.
very experienced and very savvy. I looked into the Quarles family a little bit, and his father was a Yankee from, I believe, New Hampshire. Quarles was first generation living in Wisconsin, first generation lawyer.
Did
But-
the second attorney Quarles get paid?
Good question. I don't know.
But
Yeah,
no.
Mr. James obviously didn't get paid.
'Cause it's-
And he
Yeah.
put in a bunch more time than Mr.
Yeah, that's
Quarles
true.
did.
Yeah,
yeah.
weird thing that they just had a white slip of paper and a green slip of paper.
Yeah,
Is that
kinda
because
gives it
people
away.
couldn't write or something? They just had to
Maybe.
color
So
code it?
it was so dramatic reading the newspaper article. The foreman reached into his pocket and removed the verdict, and it was white.
Oh,
That's so strange. I wonder if that was a Wisconsin thing or if that was everywhere back then.
what do you think really happened to us? Do you think that she was poisoned?
I don't buy the arsenic thing. I think that was a setup.
Yeah.
But I do wonder about the abortion.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, I'd say there was an attempt at abortion. Now, who did it? I don't know, but it seems like maybe that happened. And I almost suspect Bertha's own mother, Maggie, and definitely her father, of egging Frawley on, of building this case, because I keep going back to the fact that if abortion became known, it would be a huge stain on their family.
Yeah.
Mm.
They couldn't have that come out. I think they needed another explanation as to why she died.
Interesting. Seems like her husband Peter was a minor character in all this. And then wasn't he kind of written off as, not being too with it?
Well, they described him as stroking his thin little mustache and smirking. He didn't
Smirking.
really seem like a person who was grieving the loss of a young spouse.
Do you think
Oh.
Elizabeth reformed her ways and didn't make any more attempts at advances toward Peter?
Well, first she moved, and honestly, she died pretty soon.
Wow.
It took a lot out of her.
It's just so weird that they picked on her for this. Like, I know we've talked about it was Frawley's ambition, but I just have a feeling that there was something else that motivated them to go after her. I mean, aside from just being a woman.
Maybe they knew about her aggression towards Peter.
That could be.
It certainly seemed that for whatever reason, she had a bullseye on her back.
Yeah.
Doesn't make you guilty of murder, though.
Didn't Carson also come out and defend her?
Yes.
Like, why would he go out on a limb for her?
Well, he had a good relationship with her husband.
Oh, right.
He and this guy that we didn't even talk about, his name was Buffington, who was another businessman. Those two were the only ones who ever spoke out in her defense.
Really?
And it's weird because they were both pillars of the community, but that wasn't enough. The vast majority of everyone else just condemned her.
Mob mentality, maybe. Just kind
Yeah.
of stirred
Yeah.
everybody up. Was it a
Yeah.
very religious community too?
Certainly in name, this doesn't
Yeah.
seem like in action.
No, I just wonder if people were like getting on a high horse because she was kind of a free woman.
Oh, I think there was definitely that.
Wasn't there something where one of the jurors showed up in drag?
Yeah.
Too? That's another great moment. It's
Oh,
just feel
yeah.
like there was random things that happened along the way. Was the media on Frawley's side, or were they just stirring up business by reporting all this?
I think in general, they tilted towards Frawley's side. But remember what Frawley, we think, did was plant all these stories before and during the trial. Or we read the American Citizen article that was anonymous, but we're pretty sure it was written by Frawley. So he clearly used the media to froth up the mob.
It makes you think because you have some of the same questions today.
Oh,
The media
absolutely.
is supposed to be impartial, but doesn't seem like it always is.
Exactly. That's why I thought this was a compelling story, because there
Yeah.
are so many parallels between what happened then and today.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what year was it?
1892.
That's wild. It's a
Mm.
great story.
Very good, yes.
Yes.
Thanks,
a wrap.
guys. That's a wrap. Doppelnamers is a production of Harriet's Guides, LLC. Our theme music was composed and performed by Mary Jean Stead, orchestrated and arranged by Janine Lynn Claps. The Doppelnamers logo was designed by Kay Lum. Thanks to my co-hosts, Mary Jean Stead and Kathy Boyle Almeida. Thanks to the Wisconsin State Law Library, the Wisconsin Historical Society, the archivists at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. Take care, Doppelnamers.